She had been cleaning his building for 8 months. She knew his schedule before his assistant did. She knew which hallways he walked at night when he couldn't sleep. She knew the name on the framed photo he kept turned face down on his desk. She knew because she was there the day that photo was taken. She was there at the beginning, and she was there at the end. He just didn't know she knew. Not until the night everything he had built came apart in front of everyone who feared him most. She didn't cause it. She didn't plan it. She just kept cleaning, and somehow, that was enough. If you've ever been the most invisible person in a room full of powerful people, this story is for you. She never said a word to him, not once in 8 months. Subscribe before we get to why. Because when you understand what she was actually doing in that building, everything changes. Rachel Mensah was straightening the chair in front of the desk when she saw it. Not the photograph. She had noticed that, on her first visit, face down at the far edge, positioned with the specific deliberateness of someone who had made a decision about it and did not want the decision revisited. She had never touched it. It was not her business, and she had learned, in the past 3 years, to be precise about what was and was not her business. What she saw was a document on the floor, half slid under the desk, as though it had fallen from somewhere and no one had noticed. She picked it up to place it on the desk. She was not trying to read it. She genuinely was not. But her eyes went to the top of the page before her brain could issue the instruction to look away, and what she saw there made her go very still. A name. Choi Soo-yeon. She set the document on the desk. She looked at the face-down photograph for a long moment. Then she picked up her cloth and continued wiping the windowsill, moving with the same steady efficiency as always, her face arranged in the same neutral expression she wore for every floor of this building. But her hands, if you had been watching closely enough, were not quite steady. She had known that name for 11 years. This was the office of Choi Sang-woo, and she had cleaned it exactly twice in 8 months, both times escorted by the building manager, Mr. Yoon, who stood in the doorway as though she might otherwise help herself to something. The office's ownership was communicated not through any nameplate, but through the quality of silence surrounding it. People on the 14th floor spoke more quietly within 20 feet of that door. They checked their posture. They became, Rachel had noticed, slightly less human, as though proximity required a reduction in the biological evidence of their own existence. She had understood why, on her 3rd week, when she saw a company profile pinned to a board in the HR corridor and recognized the face. She had stood in that corridor for a long time. Then she had pushed her cart to the elevator and gone up to the 14th floor and done her job. She had been doing her job ever since. Choi Soo-yeon had been 22 years old when Rachel met her in the orientation week of a study abroad program at Yonsei University. Rachel had been 23. Already a year into her biochemistry degree, already navigating the particular exhaustion of being one of a handful of African students in a Korean university in 2018, when the social script for that situation was still being written and nobody had given her a copy. Soo-yeon had sat down next to her at an orientation lunch without the slight hesitation that most people performed before deciding to sit next to Rachel, and that absence of hesitation had been so startling that Rachel had looked at her directly, which was not something she did with strangers in those days. What she found was a girl with a smile that arrived slowly and a laugh that arrived all at once, which Rachel would later understand was the most accurate possible summary of her entire personality. Soo-yeon was warm in the way that people are warm when it costs them something, not the easy warmth of people who have never been hurt, but the deliberate warmth of someone who has decided that being closed is more expensive than the risk of being open. They became friends the way people become friends when they are both foreign in the same place, quickly, completely, with the particular intensity of people who have only each other to translate the world through. Soo-yeon was foreign in her own country in ways she would explain to Rachel over late nights and instant noodles and the occasional bottle of maggioli that neither of them could really afford. Her family, she said, was the kind of Korean family that had specific requirements for the life you were supposed to want, and she had stopped wanting those things at around age 16 and had been quietly at war with that fact ever since. Her brother, she said, was the one who had most completely become what the family required. She said his name once, Sang-woo. She said it the way you say the name of someone you have complicated feelings about, not with bitterness exactly, but with the particular flatness of someone who has processed the complicated feelings down to something they can carry without it showing. He was 8 years older. He had done everything right. He had gone into the family business and expanded it and become, by the time Soo-yeon was describing him on a Tuesday night in a small university apartment in Seoul, as something closer to a figure than a person, something the family pointed to as evidence that they had done something correctly, without much discussion of what it had cost. Soo-yeon didn't hate him. That was the thing Rachel had always remembered. She didn't hate him. She just didn't know him anymore. She had stopped knowing him around the time he stopped coming home, which was around the time the business became the kind of business that required a person to stop coming home. What she wanted from him was not an apology. She was past apologies. She just wanted him to know that she existed, that she was a person with a life, and a laugh that arrived all at once, and a degree she was trying to finish, and mornings she was trying to get through. She wanted to be real to him. He never came. Not when she got sick the first time. And not when she got sick the second time. Not at the end. Rachel had been there at the end. She had held Soo-yeon's hand in a hospital in Seoul and watched her friend, the most alive person she had ever known, become, over the course of a February that Rachel could not now think about in any sustained way, someone who was no longer there. She had gone back to Ghana after the funeral. She had spent 2 years trying to become a person who could function in the ordinary sense of the word. She had eventually, with considerable effort and the help of a therapist who charged too much and was worth every cetus, succeeded at this. She had come back to Seoul because Seoul was the last place she had been fully, completely herself, and she was trying to find out if that self was still available. She had not planned to end up in the Choi Group building. She had answered a job listing. She had needed income while she figured out her next steps with the biochemistry degree that lived in a box under her bed in her one-bedroom apartment in Jongno-gu. The building manager had offered her a night shift, and she had taken it because night shifts suited the version of herself she was currently living in, the version that preferred the world with most of its people removed. This was the part that her friend Maria, who was the one person in Seoul who knew the full story, could not entirely understand. Maria was a practical woman from Lagos who had strong opinions about closure and confrontation and the therapeutic value of saying difficult things directly to the people who needed to hear them. But Maria had stopped accepting Rachel's explanations 3 months ago. It had happened on a Sunday afternoon in Rachel's apartment over jollof rice that Rachel had made too much of because she still hadn't recalibrated her cooking for one person after 6 years of trying. Maria had been eating and half watching something on her phone, and then she had set the phone down slowly, the way she did when she had decided to say something she had been holding for a while. "I think you're punishing yourself," she said. Rachel kept her eyes on her plate. "I'm working a job, Maria. It's not that deep." Maria had looked at her for a long moment with the expression she used when she had already decided that what someone had just said was not the truth, but that arguing about it directly would be less productive than letting it sit. She picked her phone back up. She said nothing else. She ate the rest of the jollof rice. But the sentence had gotten inside Rachel in the way that true things do when you are not ready for them. Quietly through the back, settling into the part of you that does its work without asking permission. She had thought about it on the elevator up to the 14th floor that Monday night. She had thought about it while she cleaned. The truth was this: she was not punishing herself, but she was not entirely ready to leave either. Being in this building, moving through the spaces Sang-woo moved through, carrying Soo-yeon's bracelet on her wrist through the floors of the empire he had chosen over his sister, there was something in that which felt like the last form of witness available to her. Not revenge, not confrontation, just presence, like the fact of her in this building, every night, knowing what she knew. She finished the office. She picked up her cart. She did not turn the photograph over. She went to the 13th floor. Choi Sang-woo did not think about his sister every day. This was something he had achieved through a discipline so complete it had long since stopped feeling like discipline and started feeling like architecture, a structural feature of who he was, load-bearing, not to be disturbed. He was 42 years old. He had built a company that employed 4,000 people. He had made decisions that lesser men would have required committees and months and considerable emotional preparation to make, and he had made them alone, at his desk, on the same day the situation arose. He was not a man who was undone by things. Now, he had been told this about himself often enough, and in admiring enough tones, that he had accepted it as simple description rather than the warning it probably was. His desk held two things face down: his phone, because the screen lit up too often with things he had already decided about, and a photograph, because he had made a decision about it a long time ago and did not want the decision revisited. His assistant, Ji-young, had worked for him for 7 years and had never once asked about the photograph. This was one of the reasons she still had the job. The week everything began to shift had started badly and declined from there. An acquisition he had spent 9 months structuring had developed complications at precisely the moment that an old associate named Park resurfaced with information Sang-woo had spent a decade hoping would stay buried. He was managing both simultaneously in the way he managed everything, by removing all non-essential human content from his schedule and working until the problem resolved. Ji-young brought his third coffee of the day on Wednesday morning with the specific quality of quietness that meant she had noticed something and had decided this was not the moment to mention it. He looked up from his laptop and said, "What?" She said very carefully that a staff member from the facilities team had submitted a noise complaint about the 14th floor cleaning shift. Someone was apparently humming. He did not look up from the document. Deal with it. Ji-young went to the facilities office and spoke with Mr. Yoon, who went immediately to find the relevant staff member. He found her on the 11th floor, a woman named Rachel, and explained with the careful diplomacy of a man who disliked delivering any message that might produce an emotional response, that a complaint had been received about noise during the upper floor cleaning shift. She looked at him for a moment without any of the discomfort he had been bracing for. "Noted," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Yoon." What nobody reported to anyone was the moment that happened in the corridor just after, when Ji-young, returning from the facilities floor, turned a corner and nearly walked directly into Rachel's cart. They had looked at each other in the way that two people look at each other when a near collision has briefly removed the social scaffolding. Ji-young had apologized. Rachel had said it was fine, genuinely, without the performance of fineness that most people produced in that building. Ji-young had noticed this in the same way that people notice something slightly unusual without being able to immediately say what it is. She thought about it briefly in the elevator going back up. Then she went back to her desk and did not think about it again for several weeks, until the night she stood in a corridor outside a private dining room and tried to understand what had just happened to the most composed man she had ever worked for. That same Wednesday evening, Sang-woo was still at his desk when he heard it. Not humming, something quieter. and the specific, barely audible sound of someone moving with professional care through a space they didn't want to disturb. Through the glass wall of his office, he could see the conference room across the corridor. A woman was cleaning the table. She was working with a focused, unhurried efficiency rather different from the performance of busyness he observed in most people who worked in his building. She was not working hard for the sake of being seen working hard. She was just working. There was a distinction. He was one of the few people in his world who could recognize it because it was how he himself worked when no one was watching. She didn't look up. He went back to the park documents, but he had registered something he couldn't immediately name. A quality of steadiness in the way she moved that struck him as unusual. At most people, when they became aware of being in proximity to him, even through glass, made some adjustment. They became self-conscious. They found reasons to be slightly more visible or slightly less. This woman appeared to have made no adjustment at all. He was a fact in her environment that required no particular response. He found this, in a way he could not have explained, extremely strange. The park situation became, on Thursday afternoon, something he needed to decide about by Friday. The kind of decision that required him to open a door in himself he had kept shut for a long time. He made it the way he made all decisions, by removing himself from it emotionally and treating it as a sequence of logical steps. He signed what needed to be signed. He called who needed to be called. Then his phone showed a reminder. His sister's birthday. His assistant put it in every year because he had asked her to, a long time ago, for reasons he had never explained and she had never asked about. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he put his phone face down on the desk, next to the photograph, and went back to work. That night he stayed later than usual. Not working, not exactly, just sitting with the particular stillness that arrives when a decision has made you aware of things you would prefer not to be aware of. He was thinking about what it said about him that he had never once, in the years since Soo-yeon died, done anything on her birthday except note the date and continue. He was still thinking when he became aware of movement in the corridor outside, the night cleaner working her way through the floor. He did not look up. He simply sat, with the awareness of her presence. This woman who moved through his spaces without adjusting to him, who cleaned his office and set things back down and kept going, and felt in some part of himself he could not have pointed to, something that was not quite comfort, but was adjacent to it. The company of someone who was simply doing what they came to do. He turned off his desk lamp at midnight. The lobby was empty except for the overnight security guard, who nodded, and the faint sound of cleaning equipment from somewhere above him, already moving to the next floor. He went home. He did not sleep well. There was a night 3 weeks before the dinner when their paths came close enough to matter. It was late. The air conditioning unit near the east corridor had leaked, and Rachel had spent 40 minutes dealing with it, and was now running behind. She was pushing her cart toward the service elevator when she heard the main elevator open at the other end of the corridor and saw, without looking directly, the particular quality of movement that belonged to someone who owned a space. She kept moving. He was walking toward his office with the focused, economical stride of a man who had already decided what he was going to do when he got there. He had a phone to his ear. He was not talking, listening, with the specific stillness of someone receiving information they did not particularly welcome. He passed within 12 feet of her. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. But as he passed, she saw his free hand, the one not holding the phone, open and close at his side. Once, the movement of someone absorbing something they have decided not to react to. It was the smallest possible crack in the composure she had observed for 8 months, barely visible, gone in a second. She pressed the elevator button and waited. She had spent 8 months watching this man from the edges of his world, and she knew, with the particular certainty of someone who has learned to read rooms for a living, that whatever was happening inside him was no longer entirely contained. She thought about Soo-yeon saying his name on a Tuesday night. The flatness of it. The way she had delivered it without bitterness, which was in some ways harder to hold than bitterness would have been. The elevator opened. She got in, as she pressed 11 and got to work. The dinner was Sang-woo's event, his guest list, his preferred restaurant. A private room at a place in Gangnam that understood the particular requirements of meals that were not actually about food. It was the kind of dinner that functioned as a performance of confidence, which was sometimes necessary when you were in the middle of a situation that was testing your actual confidence at a level you weren't prepared to advertise. 12 people at the table. The conversation was substantive on the surface, navigational underneath. Everyone saying what they needed to say, while also saying something else entirely. Sang-woo was in the middle of a sentence when the glass went over. A junior associate at the far end of the table, startled by something, a chair moving, someone's elbow, though the ordinary physics of 12 people in a room, and the glass came off the table edge with the flat, definitive crack of something that had simply stopped being a glass and become a problem on the floor. The room did the thing rooms do when something breaks, a momentary collective intake, a brief interruption of all the performance, and was now recovering, smoothing itself back into the required shape. The restaurant manager appeared. He glanced toward Sang-woo, who had not reacted in any visible way, and whose lack of reaction was itself a kind of verdict. "I'll have someone clean it immediately," the manager said. Sang-woo returned to his conversation. He became aware of her before he saw her, not in any dramatic sense. He simply became aware in the peripheral way that you become aware of a shift in a room's quality, that someone had come in. He registered the movement at the edge of his vision. A woman, unhurried, professional, moving toward the broken glass with the same focused efficiency he had observed through the glass wall of his conference room. He didn't look directly at her for a moment. He was still talking. Then he looked. She was crouching near the end of the table, gathering the pieces of glass with the careful method of someone who had done this many times. Her face was angled downward toward her work. She hadn't looked up. She showed no awareness of being in a room full of people who ran things. She was simply doing what needed to be done. And then Sang-woo saw the bracelet. It was on her right wrist, handmade, visible in the slight irregularity of the beading. The specific combination of colors that was not a combination you would find in any shop. Red and gold and a particular shade of deep blue that he had not seen, had specifically not allowed himself to see in a very long time. Because he had seen that bracelet made. He had stood in the doorway of his sister's room on a Saturday afternoon. He was 26, she was 18. He was about to leave for a business trip that would become, in the way of those years, not so much a trip as a departure, and she had been sitting cross-legged on her bed making 2 of these bracelets. One for herself, one for a friend. She had looked up and smiled at him and said something he couldn't now hear in memory, only see the shape of her mouth, the particular brightness she had in those days before the brightness became something she had to conserve. Then he had left on the business trip. He had not come back, not in the way that mattered. He had come back to the city, to the building, to the family name, but not to his sister's room or his sister's life in any of the ways that would have cost him something. He had told himself there would be time. He had told himself she was fine, she was strong, she was managing. He had told himself the things you tell yourself when the truth is that you have made a choice, and the choice is your empire, and you know it, and you cannot afford to know it too clearly. She had died in February. He had not been there. He had stood at the funeral in the correct position and received the condolences of the correct people, and returned to work the following Monday because the work was what he had instead of everything else, He had not thought about the bracelet. He had not thought about the friend she was making it for, a name he had heard once. A face he had seen once in a photograph Su-Yan had shown him some years before the end. He had not thought about any of it, because the architecture required that he not think about it. He was looking at the bracelet on this woman's wrist, and the architecture was doing something it had never done before. It was failing, not all at once. Failing the way structures fail when they have been under load for too long without inspection. A quiet, interior crumbling that doesn't announce itself until the moment when it does. Rachel finished gathering the glass. She straightened up. She collected her equipment. She turned to leave. She had not looked at him once. Not when she came in. Not while she worked. Not now. She moved toward the door with the same unhurried efficiency she brought to everything, and she was almost through it when Sang-woo realized that his hands, resting on the table on either side of his wine glass, were shaking. The person across the table had stopped mid-sentence. The room had gone quiet in a way that was different from the quiet that follows a broken glass. Sang-woo was aware of all of this the way you are aware of weather, present, but not particularly relevant to what was happening inside the building of himself, where something was coming down. He thought about a Saturday afternoon, a doorway, 2 bracelets being made on a bed, and a girl who had looked up with a brightness she hadn't yet learned to conserve, and a brother who had left on a business trip and made the mistake of calling it a life. He thought about what it meant that this woman, this specific woman with this specific bracelet in this specific building, had been moving through his floors for 8 months without a word. What it meant that she had stood in his office and set something down and kept cleaning. What it meant that she had never looked at him. Not because she didn't know who he was. He understood now, with a completeness that arrived all at once, that she knew exactly who he was. She had simply decided he didn't require a response. The surface stopped running. 12 years of continuous surface maintenance, and it simply stopped, the way an engine stops when something fundamental has been removed from it. What was underneath was not in good condition. It was in the condition of something sealed in a room for 12 years and suddenly opened, and when the feeling of that opening was not something he had any architecture left to manage. He was aware of 12 people in a room who had spent considerable portions of their professional lives arranging themselves around his comfort, who did not now know where to look. He was not thinking about them. He was thinking about time, the specific, irreversible nature of it, the way it takes things from you not violently but incrementally, in small daily choices that only reveal themselves as choices when it is no longer possible to choose differently. He was thinking that he had built something very large and very impressive, and that it had cost him the one thing in his life that had been real in the way that only the things you don't protect until too late are real. His face, which had held its professional arrangement for 12 continuous years, simply stopped holding it. What was underneath was not rage or anguish or any of the performed emotions. It was something quieter and more complete. It was the face of a man who had finally, in a room full of people who feared him, run out of reasons to pretend. The room remained very still. Sang-woo sat with it. He didn't move to leave. He didn't speak. He simply sat with what was happening to him, in public, in front of everyone. Without the architecture he had spent his adult life constructing to prevent exactly this. It was, in a way he could not have anticipated, an enormous relief. Rachel was in the corridor outside the private dining room when she heard the silence change. She had registered the shift in that room's quality when she was almost at the service elevator. She did not go back. She pressed the elevator button. She thought about Su-Yan, the Tuesday nights, the macchioli, the laugh that arrived all at once. The hand she had held in a hospital in February until there was no longer a hand to hold. She thought about Maria's sentence, the one that had been working on her for 3 months without permission. She was not ready to answer it yet, but she was closer than she had been this morning. The elevator arrived. She pressed 14. She had 4 more floors to do before her shift ended, and she was going to do every one of them. Not because she had to, not because Mr. Yoon was watching, but because the work was honest, and she had learned in the past 3 years. It defined something real in honest work. She pushed her cart out into the corridor that smelled like money and began at the edges of the room, working inward, the way she always did. Floor 14, floor 13, floor 12, floor 11. Each one the same as every other night. Cart, cloth, bin, repeat. The building emptying itself of the day's performances, and Rachel moving through what was left, the real shape of these spaces, without the people in them performing what they were supposed to be. She finished the last floor as the Seoul sky was doing the thing it did in the hour before the city fully committed to mourning. She packed her cart. She took the service elevator down. She crossed the lobby past the overnight guard who nodded. Buchan walked out through the glass doors into air that was cool and carrying the particular smell of a city that had been running all night and was about to start again. She stood on the pavement outside the Choi Group building for a moment. Then she started walking. In the morning, she called Maria. She was standing in her kitchen with her first cup of tea, the Seoul light coming through the window in the pale gold way it did before the day hardened into itself, and she dialed before she had time to decide whether she was ready. When Maria answered, Rachel did not give herself a moment to soften it. "You were right," she said. Maria said nothing for a moment. Then, "About which part?" "About all of it," Rachel said. "About the building. About what I was doing there. About being ready." And Maria's voice shifted into something she probably didn't intend to be audible. "Are you all right?" she asked. Then quieter. "Are you actually all right?" "Yes," Rachel said. And she meant it in the specific way that yes sometimes means when it has traveled a long distance to get there, not the yes of someone who has never been not all right, but the yes of someone who has been not all right for long enough that they have learned to recognize the difference. "I want to update my CV," she said. "I'm ready to go back." Maria, who had been waiting for this sentence for approximately 8 months, said nothing for a long moment. Then, in the tone of someone who has learned through long experience to receive good news without making a fuss of it. "Okay, good. I know someone at a lab in Yongsan. I'll send you the contact today." Rachel said thank you. She made herself a second cup of tea. She looked out the window at Seoul going about its morning, the particular aliveness of this city that had broken her and kept her and was keeping her still. She thought about Soo-yeon, briefly, with the particular quality of thought that no longer needed to be managed, warm and present and sad, in the way that love is always sad when the person is gone, and clean in the way that things become clean when you have finally, without announcing it, decided to continue. She put the bracelet on. She went outside. If this story stayed with you, you already know why. It's not about him. It was never about him. It's about what it means to carry something quietly, move through the world anyway, and choose, without a speech, without an audience, to keep going. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. We'll be here.